Great. Well, good morning, everyone. We're very happy to see you all here today. My name is Dina Abdul Fattah, and on behalf of the organizing committee of this session, Penelope Wagner, we're both based at the Norwegian Meteorological Organization, and we also have Irja Malmö from the Swedish Defence University, and our fourth collaborator from the Norwegian Defense Research Establishment. Arild Berg is unfortunately not here, but we are really happy to welcome everyone here in the audience and also our speakers to our session on maritime extremes, communication uncertainty, and emerging technologies. So this will be the first of a two-part session today. So this is the morning part, and if you're interested in the topic and getting some different perspectives, we have also another part in the afternoon after lunch. And really today is to really set the stage about the changing Arctic. I'm sure many of you were present this morning at the opening remarks by our Prime Minister of Norway. And the maritime region in the Arctic is undergoing not only rapid scientific and also natural changes, some of which are also induced by human-induced climate interventions, but also due to just the changing geopolitical and also context that we're living in the Arctic. So what does that then mean from a hazard perspective? As I mentioned, these natural changes are also causing stress and different new normals that we're experiencing on different timescales, different ways, different extremes than we've seen before. But also this element about the human element, whether it's man-made or human-induced. There's a lot of different players, a lot of different stressors, a lot of different actors involved. And this really brings into the question the uncertainty of a hazard, whether that is a natural hazard or something, militaristic potentially, and how that essentially changes how we communicate about this, but also understanding the probabilities of these events and trying to understand too how we can really harness new technologies to better do what we already do and do things potentially differently. So that was really the framework that we are really interested in to bring forth in this session, and we have a lot of different perspectives, nationalities, and also really different ways of looking at things represented in the session. So I think it will be really interesting for those that are listening, but also from us that we're organizing. It was quite unique to be able to look at things from a lot of different multidisciplinary, but also interdisciplinary perspectives. So we have today 4 speakers. We're really excited to welcome each up for a presentation. And to start then, we will kick off by Irja Malmö, as I mentioned, from the Swedish Defence University. Irja is a really unique unicorn in this world of emerging technologies. She's a researcher at the Swedish Defence University, and her work examines the narratives and the socio-technical imaginaries that shape the development and governance of AI. So without further ado, Irja, I welcome you to the stage.
Thank you so much, Dina, for the presentation and the introduction. And yes, I'm also very excited to be here to speak to you about my research on sustainability and security. And these are topics that we have been discussing a lot in this conference. And here I am to provide yet another perspective on this very important discussion. So, in the Western liberal world, we typically view security and sustainability as our 2 highest priorities, whether it's protecting planetary boundaries or strengthening societal resilience. These goals align closely with the ideals set out by the UN. But here's the catch. When we try to merge security and sustainability in practice, they don't always work in harmony. In fact, they often conflict, creating a trade-off or even a paradox. Nowhere is this paradox more visible right now than in the Arctic, with its vast untapped resources and a landscape that is physically transforming before our eyes. The region has become a central arena for 21st century geopolitics. So in this presentation, I want to focus on the Arctic through the lenses of security and sustainability. And I'll be looking at how national ambitions, driven by demand for technological innovation, are creating a dangerous nexus of environmental and security threats. So my goal with this presentation is to lay the groundwork for today's session on maritime extremes, specifically by touching on communication, uncertainty, and emerging technology, and to open up a dialogue on how we can navigate this complexity. I will also link my discussion to two examples that address these topics, namely the Svalbard satellite station, Svalsat, and Greenland data centers. So, the Arctic region has historically been defined by both cooperation and conflict, separating between high politics, that is state security rhetoric, and low politics, pragmatic local cooperation such as fisheries. But recently, that balance has shifted. At the moment, sustainable development is being overshadowed by the securitization of the region. Take climate science, for example. Until 2022, Western and Russian scientists worked together to monitor permafrost. When that collaboration collapsed, we effectively lost access to climate data for 50% of the Arctic landmass. For decades, the Arctic Council has kept the region stable by focusing on environmental protection. But in the 21st century, that stability has eroded. It started with symbolic acts, like Russia planting a titanium flag on the seabed of the North Pole in 2007. Then came China, declaring itself a near-Arctic state, and the US proposing to buy Greenland. The breaking point, of course, was the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This forced the Arctic Council into a temporary pause, marking its most difficult period in history. However, while high-level security is tense, pragmatic cooperation survives below the radar. A great example of this is the Barents Sea fishery. Despite the war, Norway and Russia still meet the set cod quotas. We also have a rapidly changing environment. The Arctic is warming at 4 times the global average. This is an existential threat to indigenous communities and to the world on a global scale. Paradoxically, it is this very crisis that fuels the conflict. The melting ice is unlocking shipping routes and minerals that nations are competing for, creating a vicious cycle in which environmental collapse drives the very security race that ignores it. So I will say a little bit about the study that has guided this presentation. And to really understand how the academic community discusses these issues, we conducted a content analysis using the Web of Science database. And we started first with a broad data set of roughly 12,500 abstracts related to the Arctic. We then filtered these using specific keyword strings to separate the security discourse from the sustainability discourse. And we found 1,200 abstracts focused on security and 11,000 focused on sustainability. We also validated the AI's output by manually coding a random sample of 50 abstracts to ensure the conflict and tech themes were accurately identified. But the crucial finding then is that when we looked for the intersection abstracts that explicitly discuss both concepts together, we found only 20. So this could indicate that while both topics are very popular, they are rarely analyzed together. And now I will focus a little bit more on the competing narratives that we have identified in the results, the preliminary results. So our analysis reveals first a central conflict between two competing narratives. On one side, we have the security-first approach. This narrative focuses on re-securitizing the region to handle geopolitical threats. We see this tension clearly in dual-use technologies like space infrastructure. While satellites are essential for monitoring climate change, this narrative treats them primarily as national security assets rather than tools for open scientific collaboration. On the other side, we have the ecological critique. Scholars here view current security strategies as pathological. Why? Because states are militarily securing the very hydrocarbon resources that are causing the climate crisis in the first place. Accordingly, we must desecuritize the Arctic, stripping away the military logic to make room for the international cooperation needed to address the environmental crisis. This theoretical clash boils down to the ultimate practical question, national sovereignty versus international cooperation. And this tension culminated in the historic pause of the Arctic Council following the invasion of Ukraine. When the choice had to be made, the security-first narrative overrode the ecological need. Another conflict evident in the analyzed material is a direct clash between two powerful narratives, the the economic drive for energy security versus the scientific imperative for an energy transition. In countries like Finland and Norway, we see the term national security being used to justify the status quo. The argument is that maintaining fossil fuel production is essential for socio-economic stability. However, we also have a technological paradox regarding the green transition. We need green technology to solve the climate crisis, but building that technology, batteries and wind turbines, requires massive amounts of critical minerals. Therefore, there are strategic reasons for securing these natural resources and precious minerals. Currently, there is a strong narrative, particularly among the Western powers, with the USA as its strongest proponent, that China is close to achieving global monopoly over critical minerals needed to develop new technologies. Therefore, the question of accessing these rare earth elements is now also being framed as a matter of national security. So we are left with a difficult reality. The pursuit of sustainability is driving intensified resource extraction. However, true security cannot be sustainable if it ignores environmental collapse. If our version of security relies on the very extraction that destabilizes the planet, it is ultimately self-defeating. And this brings us to profound tension as well between national economic development and indigenous human security. For indigenous population, this development comes at a steep cost. While states often claim to protect indigenous rights on paper, in practice, industrial development takes precedence. The result is a documented decline in traditional subsistence activities like reindeer herding and fishing, and the shrinking indigenous population. To make this tension concrete, we can look at two recent high-profile cases in the Nordics. First, the Fosen wind farm case in Norway. In 2021, the Supreme Court handed down a historic verdict. It ruled that the construction of massive wind turbines on the Fosen Peninsula violated the human rights of the Sami people by destroying critical reindeer winter grazing land. However, despite the court ruling these licenses invalid, the turbines are still spinning today. This has sparked a fierce debate about green colonialism, the idea that we are sacrificing indigenous rights on the altar of the green transition. Second, we see the Gällivare mining expansion in Sweden. Here, the state-owned company LKAB has identified the Per Geijer deposit, describing it as Europe's largest source of rare earth minerals, the very minerals needed for our electrical vehicles and wind turbines. The EU views this mine as essential for strategic autonomy from China, but for those local Sami villages, this isn't security. It is an existential threat that would sever ancient migration routes. These cases prove that national security and human security are not just theoretically different. In the Arctic, they are often in direct conflict. This tension brings us to the central dilemma of Arctic governance today, the clash between international cooperation and national sovereignty. Nowhere is this tension more visible or more consequential than in the evolving relationship between China and Russia and how that axis interacts with the other Arctic states. On paper, cooperation is framed as the only path to stability. Both Beijing and Moscow express a strong desire for sustainable and mutually beneficial partnerships, particularly in developing the Northern Sea route. The Arctic is harsh and expensive. As the sea ice melts, the opening of the region provides new business opportunities. So accordingly, the Arctic should be viewed as a logistical business opportunity, a maritime highway that requires shared investment to function. But the return of the great power rivalry, and specifically the military conflict in Ukraine, has forced states to re-securitize. We have seen a pivot in which nations prioritize their own interest over shared goals. For the Western Arctic states, this means viewing Chinese investment not as a capital, but as a Trojan horse. The result is that Arctic government has become fragmented. We no longer have a unified Arctic Council spirit. Instead, we have a divided region, NATO, half Russia, China, and then the US that we're not really sure about. And this governance creates cracks that geopolitical competition is all too eager to exploit. And this brings us to our final analytical tension, the clash between connectivity and vulnerability. As we have seen, the Arctic is no longer just a frozen wilderness. It is rapidly becoming a major hub of technological infrastructure, often referred to by the industry as the node pole. The cold climate and renewable energy make it the perfect engine room for the world's data. We have already discussed the Northern Sea route as a shipping lane, but we must remember that modern shipping doesn't just run on diesel, it runs on data. This route requires a massive backbone of digital infrastructure to function, from satellite uplinks to subsea fiber optics. And while this connectivity drives economic growth, it creates new security vulnerabilities. Although we might not see conventional warfare, tanks and troops in the high north, the risk of hybrid warfare targeting this digital infrastructure is growing. In the modern Arctic, greater connectivity inevitably means greater vulnerability. So with this reality in mind, that infrastructure has now become a battleground, let us examine exactly how this plays out on the ground. We will look at the intersection of security, sustainability, and technology through two critical case studies: the Svalbard satellite station and the data centers in Greenland. So, if we first look at the Svalbard case and the Svalsat, this is the world's largest commercial ground station, and it possesses a unique geographic superpower. Because of its proximity to the North Pole, it can see polar orbiting satellite on every single orbit, that is 14 times a day. For agencies like NASA and the ESA, this is indispensable. It is the primary downlink for the climate data that tracks our melting ice and changing weather. But this critical tool for science is simultaneously a high-stakes security asset. Satellite technology is inherently dual use. The same antenna that downloads a weather image can also download high-resolution surveillance data for military intelligence. And this has created a flashpoint. Russia has explicitly accused Norway of violating the 1920 Svalbard Treaty, which strictly forbids using the island for warlike purposes. They argue that by supporting NATO's Eyes in the Sky, this station has crossed the red line. And likewise, Norway has also accused Russia for this same type of violation. And this isn't just a legal debate, it's a physical reality as well. The station relies on 2 fiber optic cables to send that data back to the mainland. In January 2022, one of those cables were mysteriously sabotaged. It was a stark reminder that in the modern Arctic, even scientific infrastructure has become a theater for hybrid warfare. If we turn our eyes towards Greenland, then, the region is rapidly becoming a global hub for data storage. But for Greenland, this isn't just about economics, it's also about autonomy. Greenland and Norway are currently modernizing their digital infrastructure with a very specific goal: to end their historic reliance on external partners. We see this happening right now in Nuuk, the capital where TUSAS, the state-owned telecommunications company, is constructing a Tier 3 data center. Crucially, this facility is powered entirely by the expansion of the Buxefjorden hydroelectric plant. This is green sovereign infrastructure. And they aren't just building locally. Greenland has positioned itself as a key partner in the Far North Fiber project. This is a planned subsea cable that will connect Europe to Japan through the Northwest Passage, literally rewiring the map of global connectivity through the Arctic. So the TUSAS example shows that building data centers is beneficial from the perspective of sovereignty and societal resilience, since we want to build technological infrastructures that are self-sufficient. However, I have another example also that shows that data centers can have the opposite effect. So, last month was a hectic one for the Arctic region, with President Trump openly discussing the United States' strategic plans to control Greenland. However, plans were also unveiled in January 2026 for a massive 1.5 gigawatt data center in Kangerlussuaq. Spearheaded by GreenMet, a group of former US officials, this project aims to turn the former US military hub into one of the world's largest AI computing campuses. Now, unlike the local TUSAS project we discussed earlier, this is explicitly an American-led initiative. It is designed to secure US dominance in the global AI arms race. The project is pitched to the world as the ultimate solution to the AI energy crisis, due to the access of cool air and green power. However, this facility is not just a commercial infrastructure, it's also a national security asset. And it functions as a form of strategic denial. By locking down Kangerlussuaq's energy and land for the US, the project effectively blocks Chinese state-owned enterprises from establishing a digital foothold in the North American Arctic. However, the project is likely to have enormous consequences for the surrounding environment, and it risks turning Kangerlussuaq into a US digital enclave, effectively taking a huge chunk of Greenland's energy potential and removing it from local democratic control. So this brings us to the discussion, where we must confront a critical realization. While security and sustainability are both global ideals, in the Arctic, they often come with the double-edged trade-offs. I want to specifically highlight 3 specific clashes that we've observed in our research. First, we have the conceptual clash. Merging these two concerns often yields conflicting goals. Take the concept of energy security. Government frequently use this term to justify continued fossil fuel production, arguing that they need to keep the lights on to remain secure. But this logic directly contradicts the urgent existential need for a zero-carbon transition. Second, we have the justice clash. Even when we do pursue the green transition, it creates new conflicts. We often frame green energy as inherently good, but for indigenous communities, a wind farm or a mine for critical minerals can be just as destructive to their land and cultural security as an oil rig. And this forces us to ask them comfortable governance question. Who gets to decide whose security is more important? And finally, we have the technological clash. We often assume that smarter technology makes us safer and greener. However, our analysis suggests that emerging technology itself creates new vulnerabilities, as it sets a ground for hybrid warfare, where it also becomes more difficult from a purely legal perspective to decide if there's been an antagonistic attack or if it's just a normal accident. So, to conclude, what can we say about the content in this presentation, the conflicting narratives of security and sustainability, and how they are shaped in actual settings like the 2 distinct case studies we have discussed, Svalbard and Greenland? They reveal that in today's Arctic, sustainable development, security, and technological progress are no longer separate conversations, but they are a co-production, meaning you cannot have true regional resilience without addressing them simultaneously. True resilience isn't just a military wall, it's a renewable energy grid that can withstand a cyber attack and a blizzard. Today, we are witnessing a new geopolitical reality where infrastructure is never just infrastructure. That sustainable data center is also a tool for strategic denial. That scientific satellite station is also a target for hybrid warfare. This leaves us with the Arctic's double edge. We see that the pursuit of security through remilitarization often undermines cooperation, the science and data side of it. And we see that the race for technology, like the AI arms race, threatens the very sovereignty of the communities that host it. These are deeply complex questions. And if there's one thing that this analysis has shown us, it's that the answers will likely be complex as well. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to the discussion later.
We have time for one question.
Thank you so much, Ulf Jonsell from Swedish Polar Research Secretariat. There are many subsea cables, intercontinental fiber optic cables globally. but there is no one in the Arctic, and that's when those projects wanting to deploy such cable, then the vulnerability question comes as one of the first questions. But do you see any additional vulnerability for a cable in the Arctic compared to all the cables that are there in the world already existing? Is there any additional aspect, because all of them could be vulnerable or subject to any malicious attack? Thanks.
Yes, thank you for the question, and I agree with you that all cables are vulnerable in a way. But I also think that due to the geopolitical aspects that we face in the Arctic, that this region is more vulnerable for those type of attacks at the moment. So.
Great. Well, thank you very much again, Irja.
Thank you.
Great. So next up then we have our next speaker, Sebastian Maria Heinrich Kopf. Sebastian is an advisor at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research. Some of you here in Norway may know it as NIVA for short. In Oslo, he specializes in ocean governance, marine restoration, and Arctic security. Interestingly enough, he is also the vice president of the Association of Early Career Polar Scientists, APEX, which represents also early career voices from around the world in polar research. So without further ado, Sebastian, welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much. The Arctic we see is the Arctic we fund. I encourage each one of you to take 10 seconds and close your eyes and think about what do you see in the Arctic. Right now, close your eyes for 10 seconds. What do you see when you think about the Arctic? You may open your eyes again. Was it this? Was it I see some thumbs up? Was it ice and open wilderness? Was it that? Polar bears? Small, in this case, small polar bears playing. Was it a map, potential for geopolitical hotspots? Weird shipping routes. I see a hand up. Was it that? An area for resource extraction? Or was it a place of life? I also see some hands up here. A place for your family to call home. A place for your children to grow up. A place for you to grow up. A place for you to be children again. A place for you to build roots. A place to call home. Looking at current international Arctic developments, not only but also particularly in the last few weeks, it seems very few people have this in mind. A place of home, a place to settle down, a place to live, a place to grow up with your children or without your children. A place to live. A place for communities, a place with communities, with schools, with families, with local businesses, with resilient local and international communities. It seems very few these days when you look into news, into your feed, see the Arctic like that. And yet, the Arctic you imagine, when you close your eyes, when you have your eyes open, when you close your mind, when your mind is open, is the Arctic you invest in. You may ask, how do I invest in this? And I thank you for that question. With your career. With your family, with your life, with your time, you do invest. You personally, each one of you do invest in the Arctic. With your time, with your career, with your family, with yourself. The Arctic you see is the Arctic you fund. Very locally, each day, day by day, and during night. What you perceive when you have your eyes closed or your eyes open is your perception. What you perceive with your own eyes, with your own ears, often is what you put in trust. What you trust in, you may vote for in politics. What you vote for in politics has a direct influence on what the policy is and on how the policy will play out for you, for your family, for your career, for you in the Arctic and beyond the Arctic. And what is policy might get funded. In this time with money. The Arctic you see is the Arctic you invest in. The Arctic we see definitely is the Arctic we invest in. So where are we right now in 2026? What is the title of this conference? Turn of the tides. The tides have turned. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Arctic as the backside of the moon. That does not seem to apply anymore. The tide has turned. Today the Arctic is hot. It was mentioned already. In several ways it is hot. And once upon a time, but actually not that far, not that long ago, exactly 1 year ago, the Prime Minister of Norway, at this very conference, exactly 1 year and around 5 days ago, said that it is not geopolitics that is the major threat. And this was also while the war in Ukraine was ongoing, with one of the major Arctic states directly involved. It is not geopolitics, it is not a military threat, it is climate change that is the actual threat that must be recognized. And therefore, with the Prime Minister saying this, is politically recognized. But when I look into funding portfolios from the Research Council, Horizon Europe, and other funders, I more and more see funding diverted from research on climate change to research in security. And even more away generally from research to military. You might be very well aware of statistics of what a low percentage international development aid gets funded compared to militaries. You might be very well aware of the low amount of funding to research compared to military. And this gets even more dire these days. With disinformation, with more focus on geopolitics instead of on the actual climate change pressures. This is not to say there's no funding, but more and more, even though it is recognized politically and internationally, nationally, locally, that climate change is the major threat, more and more assets are diverted from climate research to security. Sometimes phrased as climate security, but by phrasing it also as climate security, you securitize. you have this securitization problem. And therefore, what you perceive as the threat, what you perceive the climate change, in the end will get funded. When you perceive it as the geopolitics, in the end, militaries do get funded. So what you perceive when you close your eyes and when you have your eyes open does matter. It does matter if you perceive the Arctic as a place to call home, to live with your family, or whether you perceive it as a resource frontier. Thus, it makes sense to reverse that. And in 1 minute, I'm going to give you a concrete example how you can do that. So let's start with the money. Let the money shape policy. Let the policy shape the trust. And let the trust shape the perception. One concrete example is something that I'm also here for these days, because I do have some money. Concretely, I do have, not me personally, but where I'm working at, to avoid exactly that scenario when you think like we are in the Arctic, how can we stop what is happening and reverse climate change? How can we reverse the actual threat? I have around 9 million euro for the next 4 years in the Arctic and Atlantic for very concrete actions, local, international actions, to reverse threat on climate change, water and ocean related, and put it in a way that this can be leading to healthier oceans and waters. I'm sure we will talk about this, how to concretely achieve this in our panel discussion later. I encourage you to scan this QR code, which is also here, and apply by the end of June. There's still some time, and I'm happy to afterwards also talk to you more about this. These are funds available to support local communities. Because if you have this in mind, if you want to have a pristine Arctic, if you want to have thriving ecosystems, if you want to avoid only geopolitics matter in the Arctic, if we want to have safe trade routes, if you want to have a healthy environment and a place to call home, then it is on us to change both the perception and the funding structures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. One quick question also, if anyone would like to ask Sebastian. Great. Well, we will keep the really nice call to action in mind and then continue on with our next speaker. Thank you. Next up is Alexandra Middleton from the University of Oulu in Finland. Alexandra focuses her research on sustainability, socioeconomic changes, and also science diplomacy in the Arctic. Thank you very much, Alexandra, and the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me well here? Fine. So now then what we see is happening, that international relations are cracking, geopolitical tensions are on the rise in the Arctic. Can we assume that the trade routes and the trade corridors remain the same in the future? And that leads us to question the viability of transpolar sea route. So the findings that I present today are a part of the book chapter that will be published in spring with the Institute of Technology and Engineering. So I encourage you to read that. But let's... sorry, where's the button? Green, okay. Let's look at this map first. And what we see here is the Central Arctic Ocean in the middle, and we have two established routes. One goes through the coastal line of Russia, which is Northern Sea Route, and another one is Northwest Passage, which is in territorial waters of Canada. And what we see here, the purple line, is the transpolar sea route, which is a maritime corridor, so it's not a defined line like this, so it can vary depending on the ice conditions. And it's about 2,100 nautical miles, or it could be 2,500 nautical miles, and it's the shortest route in the Arctic. It could reduce the traveling time by 2 weeks compared to Suez Canal. And it creates a direct link between Asia and Europe. And why are we increasingly interested in this route? It's due to their catalyst, which is climate change. And we are expected to see ice-free waters in the Central Arctic Ocean in summer by 2045. And it also is accelerated by the thickness of the ice that is increasingly becoming really thin, so we don't have so much multi-layered ice in the Arctic. And there's also a strategic shift and a driver behind this route because it avoids, it bypasses coastal routes that lie in the jurisdiction of Canada and Russia. It's also one of the advantages of using this route is the legal status, because majority of the route lies in the high seas, meaning it secures the freedom of navigation, and any nation on the world can use it without asking any permission, without paying the icebreaker, compulsory icebreaker fees, without compulsory licenses and so on. And also it's not completely a complete jungle, as I would say, because there is also some rules that apply there as well, which is the Polar Code, and created by International Maritime Organization. But if we think about the how navigable is that route, because we have to consider also some cons. Of course, the largest challenge is the lack of technology, lack of icebreakers worldwide to use the route. But also there is the fog factor, which has been researched quite substantially in the last few years, meaning that the melting ice creates a lot of fog, and what shipping companies are hoping to have like a shorter voyage because of the shorter route. They still have to take longer because it's very risky to navigate in foggy waters. Of course, there is an infrastructure gap. There is not enough hubs and research and rescue to support navigation on the route. And as I already mentioned, there is a lack of icebreakers worldwide, apart from one nation that we're also going to mention about. Why this route is becoming more and more strategic is due to Chinese ambitions and as part of its Polar Silk Route. So there is a substantial investment into Arctic capacities and capabilities, and China was one of the first nations to have the pilot test on the transpolar sea route. And of course, if technology is available, if we are able to navigate in the foggy waters, then efficiency and reduced voyage times will benefit all nations, not just China, but anyone who wants to use this route. But at the same time, Russia is a very strong player in all Arctic waters because it's investing heavily in its northern sea route, and it's also creating trans-Arctic transport corridor, which will be uniting its internal rivers together with the Northern Sea Route to create efficiency and also to support local economy. And we know that Russia has the largest icebreaker fleet that is very important for its both domestic operations, but it also could be used as leverage for the future operations of the Trans-Polar Sea Route, because any nations that would like to use that would still require icebreaker assistance at some point. Another point of contention is using Central Arctic Ocean and Trans-Polar Route for laying submarine cables, because it also provides legal advantage of laying submarine cables in high seas. So basically any nation again can do that, and China has indicated in its white paper that it's willing to do that in the future. This will create redundancy and critical backup, and we have a European project which is Polar Connect that is specifically interested and is studying feasibility of laying submarine cable through the Central Arctic Ocean. But at the same time, this creates concerns about ownership, surveillance, and hybrid threats of the cables. And because the route lies in the Central Arctic Ocean, it's a very fragile environment, and it has been in a sense protected by Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, so the nations have decided to postpone any commercial activities for fishing before we have more data till 2032. But there is no such agreement for shipping, so there is no precautionary shipping agreement for the Central Arctic Ocean. So in a sense, Trans-Polar Sea Route is vulnerable because it's lying through the fragile Arctic waters. And also there are calls to declare the Arctic as a particularly sensitive sea area. So if we have to draw some conclusion, the future of the Arctic and the future of Trans-Polar Sea Route is a trade-off between competition, between involvement of non-Arctic states as well, who possess deeper competencies and are more and more involved in polar governance. And the future will depend on balancing resource competition with international safety cooperation that is not taken place yet for the Trans-Polar Sea Route. We are also conducting a survey with, in which we collect views of stakeholders, and one of the question is, for instance, what is the currently missing link of technology that is not available yet for the Trans-Polar Sea Route, and we see that almost all pieces of technology are missing there, so it's polar-class cargo ships, reliable satellite communication, search and rescue, all of them are not there yet. So if you have a chance, please scan the code so you could take part in our survey as well. We are really open to all stakeholders weighing in into how to develop and position this transport corridor in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexandra. Any questions for Alexandra? Great.
Thank you so much.
Can you hear me all right? Great. Thanks so much for that presentation. In terms of, you mentioned Russia and its nuclear ice-breaking capabilities. Have you done any work on China and its intentions to add to its own icebreaker fleet to enable this? Thank you.
Of course, there is funding schemes for Chinese-led companies to develop its icebreaker fleet, and we already have 2 in the row. So, but I guess there is not much transparency in the sense like how much is devoted to that. But if we just to judge by the amount of scientific publications that come from China on the transpolar sea route, you could indirectly see that there is real interest, concrete real interest by China in this route.
Thank you again. Great. Is it short? Yeah, okay.
What can you say to Arctic peoples? How do they benefit by the transpolar route?
I wouldn't speak on behalf of Arctic people because I think they need to be involved in co-creation and governance mechanisms that will be put in place, like we have for the fisheries in the Arctic. So my suggestion would be to use a similar mechanism also to decide about the rules and about the principles on how this route is going to be used in the future, taking into consideration local and indigenous views.
But currently they're not included in this.
Anyone can answer the survey.
Great, thank you again. So we can welcome then our last speaker for the session, Odd Svenga Harida. Odd is a senior advisor at the Norwegian Coastal Administration, where he works on maritime digital transformation and navigation resilience. Also, before moving into research and development, Odd had served as a master mariner in the Royal Norwegian Navy. So thank you very much, Odd, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I will give a short presentation about the Norwegian Coastal Administration's experience in quite a large jamming exercise that is conducted every year in Norway. The Norwegian Coastal Administration is responsible for ensuring safe and secure navigation along the Norwegian coastline, and as the Prime Minister told us this morning, the area of responsibility is quite bigger than the actual landmass of Norway, 7 times bigger. And the topic today is the reliance we have in GNSS positioning and how we see it from the maritime sector. So first, very shortly about the jammer tests. The jammer test is located on an island just southwest of us, on the island. It's about a 15-minute flight from Tromsø. Every year it gathers army of GNSS nerds who are having their equipment over there and looking how different types of jamming and spoofing is affecting the equipment. This year it was about 300 participants. It's international and it's organized by national authorities in Norway. The reason for this venue is, as we all know, our reliance in the use of GNSS for positioning. GNSS is the Global Navigation Satellite Systems. We have several of them, the American GPS, Chinese Beidou, European Galileo, and the Russian GLONASS system, and also a few others. And in the last few years, the need for addressing this issue has become less important because we see this every day, especially up in the high north. In northern Norway, on the border to Russia, this is now a part of everyday business. The GNSS interference is there. Planes coming to Kirkenes, for example, is affected by this every day. But we also see it more and more in the maritime domain. And the last bigger report from this was from Kaliningrad. And in the Baltic Seas, of course, this is something that is affecting the safety at sea every day. And the way it is affected is that the position that is presented on the electronic chart displays on board the vessel could be wrong or it could be false. The scenarios that the Norwegian coastal administrations are worried about is two larger scenarios. One is where we have a threat from an international actor, like this is outside the Norwegian coastline. We have a cruise ship going up north with 5,000 passengers on board. We have an LNG tanker coming off south. This is during a GNSS jamming experience, and you can see that the cruise ship is drifting off, and the LNG vessel is on the same track. The cruise ship was on this actual track all the time. It was not moving in this direction. This was due to jamming of the GNSS signal that the position jumped. So since this was back in 2019, and since 2021, we have tried to collect as much information about how this induces onboard vessel as possible, and all this information is openly available. There's some reference at the end. It's a lot of technical stuff in this. I will not go into detail about that, but this is just to show you that it has been a thorough data collection of different types of equipment receivers that are on board vessels, and all the data are logged and collected. And what is it that we are seeing? Typically, when you come into an environment where you have jamming or GNSS interference, you see here 3 or 4 receivers coming into the area. Dependent on the type of equipment, you will see that they have different types of responses to the jamming. 2 of the receivers, they just stop. Their position are locked to the last known position. Some of the receivers still get their position and continue along the pathway. But at some point, when the jamming is high enough, the receiver starts to drift. You will now see the blue one jumping all around. And some of them are still keeping track, and the 2 that are still keeping track, they have some measures within them that make them more capable or more resilient of being operational still under jamming. The other scenario that we are worried about are what we call the handheld jammers. There is possibilities of getting handheld. You can buy them off eBay or whatever. It's a bit like the one on the right-hand side. It's not expensive, and one of the scenarios that we see in Norway is, for example, on board container vessels. If you have for some reason don't want the position tracking the container that you are transporting something within, it can be easily taken away by a handheld jammer. And we have tested this on different types of equipment, and what this slide shows is that you have to be quite near to the jamming source. So when you have a handheld jammer, you have to be quite near to this source before it is affected by the navigation equipment on board a ship. But of course, if you are on that container ship, or if you are in a harbor, this will probably affect you. And we have examples of this in Norway. The last known example is from Tromsø, actually not long ago here in Tromsø. The reason why is difficult to find out, but it was probably due to a car having a personal protection device driving around in the harbor, and all the vessels were affected by this. So in 2025, we also came up with a research vessel. This was to have more of the maritime domain within the jammer test. Normally we've been there with a car, and the aim of the 2025 test was to test as many maritime receivers as possible to see how they respond to the different jamming and spoofing scenarios that are at the jammer test. What we see there is shown in this video. On the left-hand side, we have a hand jammer. The hand jammer is on the key at the blake. On the right-hand side, you see high power jamming conducted. And when we start the movie, you will see what we already have talked about. On the left-hand side, you will see that you have to come quite close to the jamming source before it starts affecting the different receivers. But on the right-hand side, you see that quite early, due to the high power of the jamming source, the receiver starts to drift off. Here you can see the blue receiver loses operation quite early. The green and the light yellow one also, but it's locked in the last known position. While on the right-hand side, you can see that they have to come quite close to the key, about 1,000 meters where they start being affected. And again, on the right-hand side, you see that none of the receivers were able to operate fully in such a complicated environment. And this is actually not high-power jamming. This is 100-watt jamming. A normal heater in our kitchen is 1,000 watt, and equipment that is used in known conflict zones are quite much higher. So like a rule of thumb is that with an effect of around 500 watts, you can take out a city of Tromsø, as an example. So it's quite low effect that you need to provide the position not working in an area. Okay, so coming to the end of the presentation, just a summary of what we already have been speaking about. I think that we all know that GNSS interference is real. It is repeatable, and it is definitely operationally relevant for the maritime especially, but for all domains. What we have seen from the research is that you can do many things to have more resilience towards jamming, and the easiest things is to use multi-constellation receivers, because they operate on different frequencies, so then you are more resilient. But maybe the best thing is to buy a bit more expensive antenna, which have like a control reception pattern array around it, so it's more resilient. And there's also a point on integrity, and detection matters more than accuracy. So if you have services that needs very, very high accuracy, like millimeters accuracy, they will be the one that are affected the first. So if you don't have the need for such high accuracy, you should rather focus on integrity and detection. And we also think that you need a system-of-system approach to have full resilience within position, navigation, and timing. And these are the references, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. Questions? Yes. We can take.
Thank you for your talk. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what kinds of ships are targeted generally. Does it jam the software or jam the signal and affect their navigation, or others' capacity to track it? And what are the consequences?
Yeah. So there are several consequences, and I can take a few of them, but one is for surveillance, like we base surveillance on automatic identification system, which is basically sending the GNSS position of the ship on another channel to whoever wants to surveillance the ship. And this will be affected in the exact same way as I show in the videos. On board the ships, it will, the main effect is that positioning is coupled to very, very many systems on board the ship. So when they lose position, they also lose time, and a whole bunch of alarms goes off on board the ship. So it's very annoying being on a ship bridge and you lose this. The alarms goes off everywhere. But I would say, because I like people, and you have people on board a ship, as long as they do their jobs and look outside and have navigation marks, and they can use the radars and other sources, there are not. This is not a big problem. There have been some examples of accidents related to GNSS interference, but there are not many, luckily. Thank you.
An alternative to this method is to use eLORAN. And there's a company called Helen Systems, and my understanding was that Norway had planned to buy 2 eLORAN systems for the mainland, and there was discussion about putting another one on Svalbard and maybe Jan Mayen. Anyway, could you update me on the status of that, if you have any idea?
This was news to me. Norway just decommissioned our differential GPS service of 27th of January this year. We don't have any plans of building a secondary system. And there's been many reports on this from the Coastal Administration, but in short, all systems have their vulnerabilities. eLORAN also is possible to also have their vulnerabilities, but due to the fact that the ships coming to Norway also has a lot of other sensors on board, and they also have to take a pilot, and we have other measures involved. There are, as far as I know, no plans of building up a secondary positioning terrestrial system in Norway.
Yes, Felix Tschudi from Tschudi Shipping. I understand there are new technologies coming, which is satellite-based, PNT or STL as it's called, which is GPS independent positioning. Could you say something about that?
Yes, I would like to call it signals of opportunity. There is a lot of satellites and other signals you can use, like we have on our cell phone now. When we are inside, we are positioned by the servers, Wi-Fi hotspots around, so it's kind of the same type of triangulation for making position. STL was testing their system when we were at jammer test on board the vessel that we had on jammer test, and it's more resilient to jamming or interference. But the thing with interference is that if you have a potential threat actor, which there are not many of, they can take out whatever signal they want. It's just, we know the frequencies, we know the effect, and it's just a matter of how much you put the other way around. So I think one important take from me to you is that it's important to have knowledge of the systems that we are using, and it's important to understand why you have a human in the loop, and that the human does its job in the loop and are trained at the job, and then everything is fine. I think we managed perfectly well without positioning systems a century ago. So I think we can. It will be a bit slower, but we will manage.
I think that's a great point to end on. Thank you so much. Great. We'll hand to all of our speakers. And we will have a quick stage change and get things ready for our panel, so just bear with us a few moments and we'll continue the conversation.
Okay, so we will move on now to the panel discussing these issues that we've been talking about in our presentations. And to start with, I have a question for you, Alexandra. since you have quite extensive knowledge in these topics that we have discussed in this theme. And I know that in your previous research, you've drawn parallels between the Red Sea disruptions and the rise of the Northern Sea route. So, but looking at the China-Russia partnership, I have to ask, are we simply trading a route threatened by non-state actors, such as the Houthis, for a route controlled by a revisionist state actor, such as Russia? Is the Northern Sea route actually a viable global alternative, or is it just a Russia-China highway?
Yeah, I think to put it in the current geopolitical context, I would say that it's basically serving Northern Sea Road is serving Russian interests, and it's mostly for destinational shipping of its natural resources, but it's becoming gradually more and more important for Southeast Asia, and China being the main importer of Russian resources from the Arctic and using Northern Sea Route as an alternative. And also the involvement of BRIC countries are interesting, and we need to monitor that because Russia is building really strong ties with all BRICS countries, organizing summits and having Arctic agenda implanted there as well. So, of course, the change in fortunes is really quick because we see that now India is probably not going to buy Russian hydrocarbons anymore. So then this might be one of the factors we have to consider. But I think it's mostly turning towards that part of the world, towards Southeast Asia. For them, it's becoming a real, concrete and viable alternative route.
Oh, thank you. And then I have a question for you, Dina. I would like to go back a little bit to what I discussed in my presentation on the justice clash. And as we are wiring the Arctic with billions of dollars in high-tech sensors for a strategic advantage, yet you have in your previous research shown that local responders often lack access to very basic data. So I wonder if you think we are creating a digital divide where high-fidelity data is hoarded for strategic users, while the first line of defense is left with outdated information.
Yes. Well, I think it's important to also remember that the Arctic is not monolithic. So there's a lot of different Arctics within the Arctic. And that will also then play out in how different local communities across the Arctic have access and information, and also the ability to use that information. So I have lived in different parts of the Arctic and I've seen this firsthand. I've worked with this, especially from a search and rescue context. And at least from the American Arctic and the Alaskan Arctic context, especially the further north you go, there is very much that disconnect between what is available and what is possible. But I wouldn't say that would be the same potentially, for example, if we look at the Russian Arctic, or even arguably here in the Norwegian Arctic, where there is much more focus on that resiliency in kind of the day-to-day and also in a rescue capacity. So there would be a big opportunity to say, how do we elevate the voices across the Arctic to have an equal footing in these discussions? And more importantly, from especially a data provider, and this is a plug for the next session, where we'll be talking a lot about this, is that how do we ensure that the data that we produce is actually reaching the users and that they have the ability to not only access it, but to use it? And those are two very different things between access and use. So that also will be a really important thing to distinguish in the years to come, is making it available, but also making it usable. And that has to be also be beyond just your own kind of sovereign identities that you have to maintain.
And then also, how can we trust the data? Because there's a lot of noise and disinformation. And
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we saw a great example from the last presentation about things, like spoofing is obviously something that we can already kind of wrap our head around, right, in a way. But there is also now increasingly, and not just, I would say, in this data framework that we're talking about, but data in general and the state of the world that we are in, it requires a much more critical perspective and eye towards it. And this goes back then to really fundamental education. How do we really create people on the job, but also in society, to be critical of the information that they use? And that's really difficult, especially with the advent of new technologies that people haven't used before. So we're learning, and then we're trying to also teach people to learn and to use. And there's a lot of steps here that we are really accelerating quite fast in this advent of especially AI and other technologies like that. So I think it really will require, and as an interdisciplinary scientist, we need much more social science working alongside the physical and technologist scientists to really show that this is really, a narrative and imaginary issue, and that we have to really tackle this now and not as like a hindsight or later thing, because it can, create a lot of complexity that we're not prepared for.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Okay, so I have a question for you now, Sebastian. And in your presentation, you talked a lot about how science is becoming securitized in a way, and that we see that funding is going towards military projects rather than collecting data. And I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit, on what that will mean for the Arctic, and also how can we actually solve this concretely.
You're not starting with easy questions here,
no?
Are you? Let's plug in what you just said about the end user. I'm a jurist. What is the end user of a jurist, or end user of a democracy? It's always the people. We, the people, in the US constitutions. And this echoes in a lot of constitutions. What is the danger of talking more about security is talking about war. As a jurist, I do have one mission, which is to understand war and law, and not only to understand it myself, but to enable every person, the end user of law, which is citizens, which is you in the audience, which is us here on stage, which is everyone, to understand what law is, to understand law texts. One important thing is about war, for example, because there could be war in the Arctic. Most likely this wouldn't start in the Arctic, but it could end in the Arctic. So what I would like, if this is allowed, to ask the audience, what do you understand as war? You can just shout in. What would be war for you from a legal perspective? What would qualify as a war in the Arctic? I hear it's a great question. Thank you. Just don't be shy. Shout in 1, 2 words. What is war? What would be war or warlike items in the Arctic?
Conflict, violence.
Conflict, violence. Perfect. Here I heard someone here over here. Seizing land. Seizing land. Some third person wanting to say. Blown up infrastructure. Great. Well, great that you say that. Not great if we have that. If we talk more about, to answer that question, if we talk more about those things, this is in the perception of our mind. And therefore we get prepared for that, and which is also a need. I mean, I do want to live in the Arctic and feel secure. I do not want to live in and feel unsecure. So it's natural that I would like the government to take care of that and to ensure that the law texts that are there allow for this. That often is rather complicated, particularly because there's not necessarily an agreed way of defining law. So all of what you said can be described easily in political science. In law, that's much more difficult if one reads into law text. And this, therefore, is then also difficult to put into a funding context and put the funding around that. I have a feeling I did not answer your questions, but that's the benefit of being a jurist. You can talk around this without answering the question.
Yes, it's okay. We can come back to that later as well. Alexandra, the topic of Greenland is very hot at the moment. And I know you analyzed Greenland's 2024 policy and its assertive principle of nothing about us without us. So how does this rhetoric stand up against the reality of projects like the US-led AI fortress in Kangerlussuaq that we talked about? Is Greenland's rhetorical assertiveness actually translating into power at the negotiating table, or is Washington still effectively designing the security architecture over their heads?
Yes, I think the analysis was done in 2024 when the policy was just released, and what struck me in that policy was that they used a lot of rhetorical devices as ethos and pathos, a lot of aspiration and envisioning future as being an independent state, but. Unfortunately, even in the text of the document, it's not substantiated by envisioning how, in economic terms, this is viable, how they could support sovereignty and being independent of block grant and also defense and health budget that is provided by Denmark. So there is that, in a sense, like a dissonance. Wanting to be independent, but how to support it. Of course, Greenland is becoming more and more economically independent by developing fisheries is the biggest sector, then followed by tourism, by opening the international hub, a really big airport in Nuuk. So there is a lot of hope to diversify economy and also mining and critical minerals. But I think this needs to be on the terms of the people of Greenland. So they have to be at the table, not just decided by big external players that this is the industry that's coming and that's it, So because if we talk about the question of AI centers, data centers, to me, it also sounds a little bit like a digital colony, because are we just extracting then green energy and cold climate from the place instead of natural resources like cryolite mining, in Greenland? That's a very controversial example as well. So I think it's not just for one big power to decide what industries and where in Greenland they has to be developed.
Thank you. And I'll be returning to you, Dina, and to the question about data integration for rescue operations. But in this climate, high-resolution radar is increasingly considered sensitive intelligence as well. So I wonder if you have encountered friction where national security classification barriers are preventing the sharing of real-time data that could otherwise save lives in a civilian rescue context, or have you seen like a clash between those two goals?
Well, if it was, I couldn't say, right? No, but I think the idea, at least from an Arctic perspective, and I think the Prime Minister this morning really had a good basis to say that, and even until now, and this has been something that has been echoed a lot throughout the conference, is that the Arctic has essentially been, in some ways, an example of collaboration, and that especially when it has come to maritime collaboration, it has been in everyone's mutual interest to ensure that, especially in a search and rescue context, that as the Polar Code stands and also international maritime law, the nearest ship, whichever nationality that may be, is responsible then to support and a support operation. So I would say that would really breach a lot of the trust that we have built in very difficult periods of history over the years. But often, I would say it's a success story in terms of in rescue operations. And of course, we don't know what we don't know, right? So there could be very well examples that we may be missing due to that element of confidentiality. But overall, I would say it has been shown, and there is a lot of joint exercises, and we have people in the room here that can speak a lot to this from personal experience, but that this has always been a focus on how do we support an Arctic emergency, because it really benefits all of us. And this has always been a really interesting theme and narrative, to use the words that you use, Irja, but especially when it comes to oil, when it comes to sea ice, I mean, that would just be a global crisis, right? So it's not just that you're supporting potentially a ship or another nationality or and so forth, but you're actually supporting environmental security. You're supporting basically the integrity of the environmental system in the Arctic. So I think there's a lot of really cross-cutting themes that really make, in some ways, I would argue, the Arctic quite unique in these kind of contexts, and maybe would not be the same in a terrestrial context or in another part of the world.
Thank you. Okay, Sebastian. I would like to talk a little bit about, since you have a legal background as well, about the subsea cables, like the Far North Fiber as tools of sovereignty. But when we look at the sabotage of the Svalbard cable, I wonder if a state actor sabotages a critical cable in international water, but says it was merely an accident. How should we treat that in a legal way, and how do you perceive the grey zone problems surrounding these type of actions?
I had a feeling you will be coming back to me. What you just did is a perfect example of why law is so difficult to understand, and why it's my mission to make it more accessible, because law is a tool for democracies, and not only used by democracies, but in democracies the end user of law is citizens. In this case in particular, you said 3 points that are not necessarily clearly defined. First of all, you said we. Who is we? When you say, like, how do we act? I assume you just going to make the assumption or answer based on we as a nation state. Then you said if a state actor cuts basically the cable, who does tell you reliably that it is a state actor? As far as I know, this is rather done by alleged fishing vessels that might or might not be disguised by to be fishing vessels, but actually are state actors. But it's very difficult to have to make the link so clear that it's actually the state, and to make sure it's actually not an accident, it's a deliberate act. There are no clear definitions in law when it is not, because it always depends on the very aspect and on a very specific case. You see this in AIS systems sometimes, that the ship moved like 100 times directly over the cable, which is pretty clear this was a deliberate act. But then is it attributable to the state or to the company, which makes it very difficult. How to deal with that as a nation state? There are 2 ways. Basically, one is legal recourse to international courts. Very difficult to do often, because it's very difficult to attribute this legally to this, to make it 100% clear. And the other recourse is, well, there are 2 more. One is military, and to seize the ship. That would be something. But to seize the ship, that also goes via the legal aspect, so you need to prove everything afterwards, which is very difficult to do again. And as soon as there's security involved, there are security interests, which makes states often not so willing to actually go in front of courts where you would need to publicly announce things. Which is why perception is so important. And if I may ask the audience one further question, may I?
Yes.
What is the color of the ocean? It does make sense, I promise. What color does have the ocean? What do you see when you look to the ocean? Blue. Perfect answer. That's the answer I was looking for. Blue is also a perception. The ocean is actually not blue. It's because of the reflections. But what is blue, I hope in the future with more fish in the ocean and in waters and less plastic, is the project called Blue Action Atlantic Arctic, Blue Action AA, where you can apply for funds, 9 million in the Arctic and Atlantic over the next 4 years. So please check out blueactionaa.eu.
Thank you. And then I just have a quick finishing question to Alexandra. If you had to look 5 years ahead to 2031, do you think the Arctic will be more integrated, connected by projects like the Far North Fiber? Or will it become even more fragmented, split into hard US versus Russia, China spheres? What is your bet?
My bet is actually that with more awareness that it's the common heritage of the world, then we'll have more interest from not just Arctic states and not adjacent non-Arctic states, but from all countries in the world to decide on the destiny of the Central Arctic Ocean, not just for the fisheries, but for all economic activities that is going to take place there once the ice recedes.
Thank you. And Dina, do you want to answer the same question?
I will try.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think we have to be optimistic, right? I mean, if you, I guess going to the point about perceptions, if you go in already kind of stacking the cards a certain way, it does in some ways bias consciously and subconsciously what you're working towards. So I hope we will be able to reestablish the collaboration that had marked really a lot of the success in the Arctic that we had seen. And I think also it's a really important point that Alexandra mentioned, that it's not just the Arctic now really interested in the Arctic and even just the typical actors at the table and not even nation states. And that was another point that has come up a lot. I mean, industry is also, where do they sit at the table in these kind of discussions? So it will really require a lot of creativity. But I think to keep that focus on collaboration will be important to have a future that we all feel is the best way forward.
Well, thank you. I think we have just run out of time for this panel. But thank you very much for this discussion. And thank you very much, the audience, for being here.